Morning. I've been trying to find some Christmas music, but the only non-copyright music I could find to do with Christmas was kind of the lively, kind of Christmassy songs rather than the worshipy church music, which I was hoping to find. But I hope you enjoyed that few bars before we start. It's lovely to be back. It seems ages since I spoke on here. It's probably not. It's not that long, but it just seems it because I was used to speaking every week to you. But I just felt that Christmas time was a time where I should give some Christmas reflections and meditation. Well, the subject really is: are you part of a story, part of the Christmas story? We'll explain a little bit about that as we go along. Week or so ago, I did a short talk at a service at the church that was in sort of after a coffee morning that we had. We have a short service called Midday Meditations, and I kind of shared a few thoughts there, and they're the thoughts which I'm adapting and bringing to you today. I've got to make changes because I asked lots of questions and the talk was more interactive, which obviously isn't the same on YouTube, where I can't be speaking to you personally, but it's the same message basically. I asked two questions. The first question I asked was, how well do you know the Christmas story? We grow up with it, don't we? We grow up with the Christmas carols, the Bible stories, the readings at church if we go to a church. It's familiar to us or to most of us. Very few people listening to this video, I should imagine, have not heard details of the Christmas story. But how well do we really know what happened? How accurate are the stories that we tell and that we hear about Christmas time? Well, I'm going to just start off with a very short reading. It's in Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, the birth of Jesus. The Christmas story only appears in two Gospels, in Matthew's and Luke, and there's only a few passages that tell the story. Most of what we understand has grown up through myths and legends and stories that have been passed on, and probably most of it may be true, but we don't know. But anyway, let's just listen to these words from the Luke's Gospel in the Bible. Jesus went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the town of Bethlehem in Judah, the birthplace of King David. Joseph went there because he was a descendant of David. He was to register with Mary, who was promised in marriage to him. She was pregnant, and while they were in Bethlehem, the time came for her to have her baby. She gave birth to her first son, wrapped him in strips of cloth, and laid him in a manger. There was no room for them to stay in the inn. Well, that's a few words of Christmas story from Luke. But when I did the talk at the church, I asked questions, and I'm going to ask you some of the same questions, even though you can answer, but I won't be hearing your answers. And the first question I asked was, how did Mary get to Bethlehem? And we traditionally think of Mary riding on a donkey, but there's no mention in the Bible about how Mary got to Bethlehem. I'm thinking about how I got to church that morning, and I could have gone by car, I could have got a lift, I don't drive, I could have walked, I could have got on a bike if I was that fit, but I didn't. I came by a mobility scooter, not probably the usual way that most people would think of as going to church. But does it really matter? Does it really matter how we get there? Donkey, he probably did go ride on a donkey. It was the most common form of transport, but we don't know. And it's the same really with much else about the story. We don't know if there was animals in the stable. We think of it as a stable, but actually it probably wasn't a stable, the room where Mary gave birth. It was probably more of a lower ground floor room within a simple house where the guests slept upstairs and animals, if there was animals, probably would have been downstairs. But it was not like we imagine Mary going and knocking on the door or going into to the reception at Travelodge or something like that. And it's not the same. And yet we kind of like read the story and we think of it through modern eyes. But it was not really a stable. It was an inn. It wasn't a farm. We don't know what was there. We don't know what animals were there, if there was any. It was more like sleeping in the car park, I suppose, at a Travelodge, if you want to go back to that analogy. We also don't know what the manger was like. It was probably a stone kind of feeding trough for animals, and we don't know if there was hay in it. We don't know if there was animals at that time. It just said she wrapped him in cloth and laid him there. We just guess and assume. And the shepherds, it doesn't say too much about the shepherds, a little bit more than what it does about some other aspects of the story. But let's just think about the shepherds. We don't know how many they were. We don't know if they bought a lamb. Traditionally, we have this image of a shepherd carrying a little lamb and giving a little lamb to Jesus. But I don't know that Mary and Joseph would have really particularly needed a lamb at that time. And I think if they had a lamb, they would have taken it. They would have presented the lamb at the temple when they went there for Jesus to be circumcised, and they offered doves. But we don't know. We don't know anything really much about the shepherds, and it's the same about the kings. We think of them as kings, but they weren't kings. They were three magi, which we get the word magician from, which came from a country where they came from, that kind of like tribe, so to speak. But we don't know much about them except that they travelled a long way, and that Jesus was probably about 2 when they arrived. It said sometime later, but sometime. What is sometime? A couple of years is nothing in God's time. In God's time, then. So how well do we know the story? I don't think we probably know the real story as well as we think we do. But that was the first question I asked, and we had a little discussion around that. Might be something you might like to think about. What is actually in the Bible and what is just part of a tradition that we've grown up with? But the second question is, are you part of the story? And this is a bit more important. Well, this is more important than how well do you know the story, because we don't really know. We only have it passed on from word of mouth, and the disciples would not have been around when Jesus was born, but there are certain things that we do know and we can believe of what we've read and what we have heard about the story. And that's what I'm going to think about, the characters in the story. Are you part of it? Who can you identify with? Let's just go through them very quickly in turn. First of all, the innkeeper. Now, I've already said it wasn't like a receptionist at Travelodge. It would have been much more simple, but Bethlehem would have been very busy at this time of the census. It says that it doesn't say that they travelled around trying to get at lots of inns and they were all closed. We don't know how many inns there was, if it was just one inn, and it might have been bursted. It might have had several people sleeping in each room. We sometimes are a little bit hard on the innkeeper and think, oh, he just gave Mary and Joseph the just sort of like put them out in the stable, out in the barn, or out in the garage. But it wasn't really like that. He gave what he had. He did make room. He could have turned them completely away. And in a way, that's the first kind of thing to think about is, do we make room for Jesus? The innkeeper would not have understood the significance of this couple, this young pregnant woman with her husband, and he wouldn't have known and understood like we do. To him, they would have just been visitors coming into Bethlehem and needing somewhere to sleep. But he made room what he had to the knowledge that he had. And And if we want to be part of the story, like the innkeeper, we need to make room. We need to make room in our hearts for Jesus. And we understand and we know so much more. And he wants to have a privileged place, not just to be put in the car park, but given the pride and the main part in our life, and to be treated as the King and Kings and Lord of Lords that he is. But that's because we understand more. So let's think, are we like the innkeeper? Should we be like the innkeeper? But should we make even more room for Jesus? And next characters in the story, we didn't read about them, but the shepherds. The shepherds may not have bought a lamb, but they heard the message. They responded, and they rushed there as quick as they could. They believed the message that they'd heard, and they came to see for themselves. And I like to believe and think that they would have worshipped and just come as they were. And this is the next thing which I feel that the Lord's kind of like saying to us, and I feel sort of that I should be sharing, that to be part of the story is to come, and it's to come just as we are, not necessarily to the manger. Though we do sometimes come to Jesus first of all through the Christmas story, but then we come through the cross, and we come to Jesus not as a babe, but as the Saviour that died, that we can be forgiven and that we can be made right with God and have that new start in life. And that's how we come to Jesus in that way. But we come with the excitement of the shepherds, the wanting to share the good news. We come believing, and maybe we have had that experience. Maybe we've not heard angels or seen angels, but maybe God's spoken to us in some way, and we've come to worship. We make room for Jesus in our hearts and lives, but we also come to him, and we come to him just as we are. And next characters are the kings, even if they did arrive a couple of years later, but they were so different to the shepherds. The shepherds were poor, ordinary people that just came to Jesus, and it was just simple. And not simple, but they just left their sheep. It might not have been that simple, but they didn't have far to go. They were just outside Bethlehem, we believe. So they saw the baby in the manger. But the wise men, I'm going to call them wise men rather more than kings. They learned, they studied, they tried to understand what was happening. And they had a long journey. They followed the star. It was a long and difficult journey. And yet they had an understanding of why they were making this journey. They understood that this was a special king that had been born. And they took gold as a present for a king, but they also took frankincense and myrrh. And myrrh was a spice that was used to anoint bodies after they died. And in a way, they were kind of like showing that this king was a king that was going to die for his people, and they were the first to acknowledge this in this simple way. But maybe we're a bit like the shepherds. Maybe that's our part in the story, is to follow that star. Maybe we're not there yet. Maybe we're trying to understand it, but if we're wise, we will keep following until we arrive at the destination and we meet with Jesus. So that's the shepherds. But then what else is in this? What else is in the story? Who else is in the story? Mary and Joseph, obviously. And to Mary and Joseph, this wasn't a king. It wasn't he was their son. He was their child. He was their baby. And I believe that Mary didn't understand everything that was going to happen. She didn't really understand and know, but she accepted and she trusted and she believed, and this was her child, and she would have loved him and loved him dearly. And It was an intimate, personal relationship. If you're a parent, think of that moment when you first hold your baby and that love that there is for this young child. And we don't come to Jesus as a young baby, but we come with that wanting that personal relationship. It's an intimate relationship. We come and we can say to Jesus that we love you and that we love him. We love Jesus because he first loved us, as it says in one of the hymns. So that's kind of the characters. And just to reflect back over what I've been sharing, we make room in our hearts. We come as we are to worship him. We look and we study and we follow that star, and maybe that's the way that we come. And we come into a personal relationship, not the relationship that Mary had with Jesus, who was bone of her bone, flesh of her flesh, so to speak, but a spiritual relationship. A relationship, nonetheless, that's personal and that's real. And, well, I'm going to end actually with another character that's I said wasn't in the story, but we don't know, and that's a donkey. We do believe that it's more than likely that Mary did travel on the donkey. She may have walked. She may have gone in a camel caravan with a group of other people. There's so much we don't know, but the donkey was the common mode of transport at that time in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and that. And that's how she probably would have travelled. And maybe that's a little bit more with who we identify with this morning, the donkey. Maybe we just feel that we're just supporting others, that we're just working, that we're just kind of being used, that we're just a humble donkey. But the donkey was in. If the donkey did take Mary to Bethlehem, and I believe that it did, it was important. It was special. They needed to get there. They wouldn't have got there. The story wouldn't have been the same without the donkey. So, in a way, where we could be like the innkeeper. We're like the shepherds coming as we are to Jesus. We're like the kings bringing the gifts that we have and wanting to worship him. And we're also a little bit like the donkey. We're a part of the story, but we're part of the story. So I did have my notes here, but I only had sketchy notes and I didn't read them because I just wanted to think about these characters again fresh this morning, and I hope that's what we've done, and I hope it's given you something to think about. When I prepared this short talk a couple of weeks ago, but I prepared it for the church, I had just finished writing the notes and I was playing music on the television. I play YouTube on the television, and I heard a lovely song for the first time, and it was called Make Room. And it's a lovely song by a group called Casting Crowns. And if you're on Facebook, the video is there to listen to. But I'm sure, and I know you can find it on YouTube. And I'm going to also ask you to listen to this song because it has these words in it, and it was the words of this song that reinforced that the message that I had in my heart was the right one, and it was make room in your heart for God to write his story. Make room in your heart for God to write his story. You're part of that never-ending story. There was a film once, and it was called The Never-Ending Story. And that's part of it. The story goes on, and you're part of it. Let's just pray together in a moment, another moment of silent reflection. Lord Jesus, I thank you that you came as a baby, but that you grew up and you grew up to die for us, and that you are risen and that you're alive, and that you call us to come to you. that you call us to come to you as you called the shepherds and the kings that followed the star. And you ask us to make room for you in our hearts. May we do that this Christmas. Made in all the bustle and the hustle and all the preparations, all the festivities, or maybe not, maybe just in the quietness of a quiet Christmas. And yet, I pray that you would be there, that you would be in each of the homes of everyone listening to this short talk, but more than that, you'll not just be within their home, but within their heart this Christmas time. Amen. Well, I'm going to be back in the new year. I don't know what I'm going to be speaking about. I don't know whether I'm going to be sharing a word that I've given in the church or something just particular for you. But if you have enjoyed this talk, if you found that there is something to think about in the words, do share. Do let me know. And if you identify with one of these characters, I'd love to know what you think and who you identify with. And I'd love to know of how this short message has spoken to you personally. But I'll leave that with you. Bye. God bless.